moving on, monitoring the communications. What happens here? This process actually, it makes sure, as we learned it in the introduction, the optimal flow of information. What is monitoring is it's just making sure that you are maintaining optimal flow of the information. This is important because we understand the level of impact of a miscommunication. I think in the beginning I told you, for example, if some wrong information is sent out to somebody who is not supposed to get it, how can that affect the overall project can be understood during this monitoring. So the level of impact of a miscommunication, right? So on a casual note, you send a project status to a very high level person of a customer, so it could impact greatly. We might have already planned some corrective actions, but in the message that is already being sent, that correction part might not have been included, but the message is already sent, okay, that there is a very huge problem here. So what happens and how do we deal it? So all these things happen, and we can control better if we have some monitoring process. So, and yes, this is also performed throughout the project, not just one point in time, because the information is flowing continuously. Let's have a quick look at the outputs. The work performance information. Of course, it is updated with the communication plan versus status, how it is being adhered to and all. The change requests are updated. Any activity which was performed to, eliminate or relax the bottlenecks. So that comes under change request. So that is important that we update it. The project management plan is updated. Again, the communication management plan, the stakeholder engagement plan. Typically these things get updated. Also the project documents, the same typical list like issue log, lessons learned register, stakeholder register. I keep repeating it. Just keep these things in the back of your mind. Let's see what inputs we need. The project management plan is referred. Of course, again, if we talk about the specifics within the project management plan, we can make use of the resource management plan, the stakeholder management plan, and again, don't limit these things to just the options that I have given, but other components can also be used. The project documents like issue log, the project communications, the lessons learned register. So I think now you might have understood why I'm trying to skip it. These are the same processes or same activities that are repeated in almost all the communications. You can also see that there is enterprise environmental factor and organization process assets. These are by default available in almost all the processes. So we need not explain it again and again and again. I think the work performance data, I think this is related to the communication plan that that we can refer to. All right, let's move to the tools and techniques. The expert judgment, someone who is aware of the cultural awareness, for example, or when we are speaking with international delegates, the international communication guidelines, there might be some when we are speaking to a government official, especially. So such guidelines expert, all of them are consulted. The PMIS is an important tool. All the multiple communication channels, they can come handy. We touched a bit upon the data representation also, like the stakeholder engagement matrix and all, and the interpersonal and team skills come handy, and the meetings are also quite effective communication tools. So with that said, we are finishing this knowledge management area. I think we can move to the next topic, the project risk management. The term risk this is usually considered as a quite negative word. So, but we must realize that risks could also be positive ones. I know I might sound philosophical here, saying risks are positive and all, but as the PMBOK guide itself says, the business of the organization always have a few risks. The risks here means something which we anticipate to happen. So anticipation could be for a positive thing or also for a negative thing. So the PMI says the opportunities which we look up to, the opportunities which we anticipate to come in the near future, they are also considered as risks, but the positive ones. And of course, the results that are harming the growth of the organization or the project, if they are forming blocks to the project flow, they are considered as negative risks, of course. So there are both types of risks, the positive, and second, the negative. So the negative risks, they are again further categorized as two parts. First thing is the business risks, which are creating troubles in the regular operations of the project. And second is a dangerous one, that is a pure risk. Pure risk is referring to the actual physical harm to the individual who is working on the job, like an accident in the work area, an injury happened during the work, somebody might lose a limb, it might even be a death risk. So all these type of risks are considered as pure risks. It's a part of negative risks. So anything that we are unsure about, but we still move ahead with a bit of preparation to face this uncertainty, that is called the risk. So basically what we do in a project, in every single new project, we start with something by anticipating a positive result. At the end of the project, at the end of our very hard endeavor, we will end up with a positive result. So which means we are handling the risk by doing a project. Things could also go wrong, but we hope and anticipate for a better result. So bottom line, all the projects that we are doing, in a way, they are risks. So does PMBOK guide talk more about these risks? Yes, it talks about two levels of risks. So first level is at the objective level, second level is at the overall project level. If we talk a little bit about objective level, the PMBOK guide has named it as individual risk. So this is nothing but a risk at the object level. It means that one of the objectives of the project is going to get affected by this potential risk. That's it. It could be positive or it could be negative, both. But the effect is going to be only at that particular object level, not at a full complete project level. So similarly, the second level is at the overall project level. This is the risk that if you do anything in any one of the objective or any one of the process, it could affect the overall project. So basically, all that we do is just the activities, not the complete project at once. So any such activity which might affect hugely or largely for the complete project, that is considered as the second level of risk. That is the overall project level risk. Few new concepts are also being looked up to. For example, variability risk. This is nothing but it's like we don't know whether the supply could meet the demand in the future or not. So let's take the example of the sunflower oil that happened recently. Due to the war in Ukraine, many people were afraid that sunflower oil might not be available. So they have, raised the prices. So be it internal factors or external factors, this is a variability that is becoming more and more popular. Another trend could be the ambiguity. So the ambiguity risk, this is nothing but the product is not certain to solve the problem. Right. So we create a product, we create a new product targeting that we are going to solve a problem when it comes to shape. So what could be the example? For example, let's take, every now and then a new onion chopper comes out. So none of these designs have been proven to be the best. So, I mean, at least for me, your experience might be different. Any onion cutter you take, we have a lot of problems associated with it. Like we have to face a lot of problems while cleaning it. We still have to peel the onions. There is no machine that could, easily cut the onions for us and give. So none of the designs could be best or foolproof design. So that is the ambiguity. So these are the two emerging trends. If we talk about agile methods, the sprints that we discussed, agile means many iterative processes, right? So in these iterations that are happening, the sprints as they call it, they are also started to include the risks within that sprint. So before I complete the sprint, what are the risks that I might have for the objectives that I'm handling, for the tasks that I'm handling, right? So every iteration has risks associated with it. So this is also becoming a new trend. So let's see what the processes we get to learn. Project risk management. As you can see, we have 7 different processes to learn in this knowledge area. Let's quickly cover one by one. The plan risk management. This is similar to all other plans. So here we define how to handle the risks. And secondly, the identification of risks. We learn how to identify each and every risk here. The qualitative analysis. This deals with prioritizing the risks, right? So there are so many risks, and then which is more impactful, right? So we add a quality to it, whether it is the topmost priority right now or the second priority because it doesn't harm us so much. Such quality is analyzed or associated with the risk. Quantitative, it's about combining the individual effects of the project. There are so many small risks associated with many objectives, and then we club or combine all these small risks to form a bigger summary of the risk estimate. So that is the quantitative analysis. Planning the responses, it's about creating a few strategies and identifying the solutions to the problem and implementing the same, whatever the plan that we have done here. This talks about implementing these plans. So, and the monitoring, it deals with tracking of the anticipated risks and whatever solutions that we have given here. We have given responses here, and then here we are tracking whether those responses are effective or not. Shall we quickly jump to the processes? Planning of the risk management. I think the planning, as you have learned, in any of the knowledge area. This is not done throughout the project. This is just done at typical time slots. Of course, it is done at the start of the endeavor, but later moving on, as the changes happen, it gets updated at that particular stage only. It's not done throughout. It's done only at some intervals. So let's have a quick look at the outputs. We just have one output. We have to create the risk management plan at the end of the process. So what happens here is we create a risk strategy here, right? So which is basically the approach of the complete risk management. There'll be roles identified, responsibilities identified. There is a risk breakdown structure. How do you put it? You have learned the WBS, right? Work breakdown structure. So similarly, there is this risk breakdown structure. Let me make use of the pen again. So we have some levels identified: level 0, level 1, and level 2. So firstly, all the sources of the project risk are listed here, and then they categorize it. Let's say 2 or 3 categories. First thing could be a technical risk. Second thing could be commercial risk. Third thing could be management risk, or some external risk. So we have categorized all the list to some different types of risks. That is level 1. And then from this, we know who can handle this category of risks. So, and then we will assign it to the right person. So the tree gets divided to branches and then further smaller branches. So similar to the work breakdown structure, we have this risk breakdown structure. What else there could be? There could be also a risk probability definition. So in the risk probability definition, what happens is they scale the risk. When I say scale, it's like we tell that, okay, this particular risk is very much possible to be realized in comparison to the risk that is almost zero. So the risk which is least probable will be given 1% or 2% probability. The risk which has maximum probability, that will be given like 80%, 90% probability. So again, whether this highly probable risk, will it impact any of my objective? So let me again make use of the pen. It's like we have probabilities listed: 70% probability, 60% probability, like this to maybe 30% probability. All these risks are identified, they are listed. Here we have the name of the risks and then the probabilities associated with it. And then we have components listed here. Components, when I say, for example, time, whether the time is being affected here. If it is being affected, yes, let's say, greater than 3 months, right? So if this risk happens, we are going to affect our timeline by 3 months. Just an example. So similarly, if this risk 60% probability happens, it can affect the cost, let's say 1 million additional cost. So it doesn't affect the time, but it can affect the cost in this example. But there could be cases that it will affect both the time and cost, like 1 month and maybe $50,000. So such variables or the objectives, we can keep on adding it. So we have covered time, we have covered cost, maybe customer quality and quality. Does this risk directly affect the quality? Does it affect the safety? So all this probability mapping is also done in the risk management plan. So that's not all. I think we can add so many more things to it. The risk management plan is a very vast, very huge document. It needs a separate lesson to be understood. What and all things are included here. You can consider like the impact matrix can be created, the stakeholder risk appetite. That is also something that I just explained. Multiple reporting formats are there. How the data is being represented, that is there. So many things that are related to risk are listed here in this risk management plan. Okay, let's understand what the inputs are. The project charter, of course, it can be used. As this risk planning is done at the beginning of the project, there may not be majority of the other components already present. We are talking about project management plan. So whatever components that are available, basically all the subsidiary management plans, you can consider only them for the risk management, because this is done at the very beginning of the project. This is not done at the half stage of the project, because risks are very, very important. Although this is listed at the end of this course, while you execute the project, this risk management plan is done at a very early stage, right? So any other component of the project management plan, it's just half cooked, right? So but still you can consider that as the input here. So similarly, the project documents, they are also not quite mature. So, but whatever documents that are available to you by the other stakeholders or from the previous projects experience, all of them can be considered here. And by default, the organization, enterprise, environmental factors, and organization process assets can be considered. This is just the same process here. Tools and techniques. An expert, again, somebody who is familiar with the risk handling process. So he can be consulted here. When we talk about data analysis, we have already discussed multiple data analysis techniques that we learned. So all of them can come handy here. And of course, meetings will also be very helpful for creating the risk management plan. So I'm moving to the next process, identifying the risks. This, unlike the previous ones, this is done throughout the project because we have to identify risks all through the project. Every activity we do, there might be a new risk associated with it. We might not have seen it at the planning stage. So this identification of the risks is done throughout the project. So one more important thing is that this becomes an input to create the risk responses. We have not covered risk responses yet. That is the next process to come. So if we identify the risks first, then we can work on the responses to these identified risks. So this will become input to the response process. Let's see the outputs. We have three outputs to bring out when we are finishing this. First thing is the risk register. This will again seek inputs from qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis. We have not yet discussed that process here, but whatever is the output of those analysis, we can use them as the inputs and update our risk register. Risk report, it typically contains all the major reports from different analysis that we did before. The project documents, like assumption logs, the risk register, lessons learned register, all of them gets updated here. Okay, let's have a look at the inputs. The default ones: project management plan, multiple components can be referred here, like requirements, schedule, costs, all of them can be referred. Similarly with the project documents, when we talk about multiple agreements, the memorandum of understanding, non-disclosure agreements, all this is referred. Why? Because we have to understand the acceptance criteria. What did our customer accept to? What did our vendor accept to? So if the acceptance is understood, the risks are also well understood. So again, the procurement documentation. This is something important. We can spend a few seconds here. Procurement documentation, why is it important? Because within the organization, we have a lot of control. As a project manager, we have a lot of control on many of the processes that are being done. We can go and directly influence the person who is deviating the process. But at the vendor stage, where we are procuring the components or the raw materials, we have no control. Things will work blindly on the trust here. Of course, it will be written on a certificate or the final quality report of the project, but process itself, it is not directly controlled by us. We can ask them, okay, give us your process reports, give us your flow charts and all, but we cannot directly go and control that operator sitting in that vendor place. So it's very, very important that we consider this as a input while we identify risk. This is the most risky area in the complete project process. So, and then we have two default processes that we should consider. I'm saying default, that doesn't mean these are unimportant. These are very, very important. We also have to consider enterprise environmental factor, organizational process assets. They are so important that they are available in each and every process. So just because they are default doesn't mean they are not important. They are the most important ones. So please focus there. Let's move on to the tools. Expert judgment. Of course, the experts are consulted here also. The data gathering tools like brainstorming can be used, checklists can be used, different data analysis techniques like SWOT analysis, root cause analysis, everything that we have learned before, they can be used here. We are talking about interpersonal skills, the soft skills that can be used to boost the morale, the leadership skills, all these things come handy. Prompt lists. Okay, this is something new we have not learned. Prompt, as the name says, this is just an pre-identified tasks or pre-identified risks that could occur. So what do we mean by pre-identification? You can consider some potential risks coming from different sources, different areas. Like for example, from political factors, many risks could come. From economic factors, many risks could come. Some technological factors, some risks could come. Some legal factors, many risks could come. Like all these are prompts. When I say prompt, the PMBOK guide writes it as PESTEL. These are just prompts. Like we are sitting in front of a blank paper, we don't know what risks to note. So these are something to start with. These are the prompts that we should work on. What does P mean? political sources, risks from political sources. For example, government says some law or regulation has changed the emission norms. From tomorrow, you're not supposed to make your vehicle which is producing more, CO2 levels or NO2 levels, something like this. So that awareness has to be there. So similarly, economic, whatever the economic decisions of the company within the organization that might directly affect the risks, the social risks, the locality that we are working on the product. Similarly, with the technology, we are working 24/7 on a technology that is going to be obsolete starting next year. There is no point in working. So such risks can be identified. Environmental, very very important. If your raw material contains some substance that might damage the environment, that might damage the fish, or you are producing a lot of waste which is going to the water, all these things are important in the environmental factors. Of course, the legal ones. Are you breaking some law by creating this product? If you are a gun making company, right? So all these things can be prompts to identify the risks. So finally, the meetings, they also come handy. I think we are done with this. We can move to the next process. Performing qualitative analysis. Basically, so this is also done throughout the process. What happens here is we are just prioritizing the risks. So let's have a look at the outputs. Okay, the project documents like assumptions log get updated, issue log get updated, risk register get updated. So once we finish with this process, all these documents are updated. If we talk about the inputs, the project management plan gets updated, the project documents get updated, all the default generic inputs, we can consider it. Moving on for the tools, the expert consultancy on similar projects, or somebody who knows the risk analysis methods, he can be very useful here. Different data gathering techniques and data analysis techniques that we have learned, they can come quite handy. The interpersonal team skills also is very very important. Okay, risk categorization, this is a new term so far, so maybe we can spend a few seconds here, but I think this is quite self-explanatory. What happens here is we are categorizing the risk. I think we talked about this also in the previous process. We categorize it based on in which category this risk falls, whether is it affecting the cost, is it affecting the time, is it affecting my complete schedule, is it affecting my deliveries. So we are categorizing the identified risks in such a way. So that is an important tool or technique. Data representation, we have learned a lot of data representation tools here, but specifically here, when we are discussing about risks and all, I think typically there is one data representation tool that we can make use of. That is, what do they call it? I think they call it the bubble chart or the disk chart. So let me quickly explain to you what this bubble chart or disk chart is. So this is, for example, that bubble chart, and then we have a lot of bubbles identified. What these bubbles are, you can see the bubbles are smaller in size and also bigger in size. So the size of the bubble talks about the impact value of the risk. Each bubble is one risk, and if the bubble is bigger, that means it has a bigger impact. And what are these boxes here? On the left, we have the proximity, how close we are to this risk. So that is the proximity. And then this is nothing but the detectability. How easily can we detect that this risk is being, going to happen? So actually, the larger bubbles, they are quite unacceptable. That means the impact of this risk is very, very high. So we have to create the responses in such a way that the size of the bubble gets reduced in comparison to the smallest one. How big is this risk? So we work in the project on reducing the size of the bubble, or some people call it disks. So that's about this data representation tool. It's a very interesting tool, but not quite useful in my opinion. But still, because the PMBOK guide mentions this, I think it's important that you learn. And I think finally the meetings. This is also an important tool in almost all the processes. Moving on, quantitative analysis. What happens here is this combines the total effect of individual risks, and then numerically it analyzes the total uncertainty of the complete overall project. So again, this is also not done at the beginning of the project or end of the project. This is done throughout the process, throughout the project. Again, this is a very time taking process while you're executing it on the project, not while you learn it. This is a very long, lengthy, time-consuming, cost-consuming process, right? So many of the small projects, they don't actually do it. They just skip this process. Even the PMBOK guide doesn't insist that you must have this process in all the projects because it involves a lot of time. It requires a huge amount of data, the past data and the data from the similar organization in that industry. And then you have to analyze because there are so many simulation models. This cannot be done on a pen and a paper, right? So there are so many simulation models, computer generated softwares, which requires a huge amount of data for these models to get created. So what they do, the smaller projects, they just don't do it. They skip this and it is allowed to skip, right? So there's nothing wrong here. But if in case that you are handling a huge project, a complex project, let's say, if you perform this task, there are going to be a huge cost savings and time savings to the company. Of course, the cost of gathering the data and populating the data and analyzing the output of this data, that comes with a lot of cost and energy, of course. But the results that it will give, they are more valuable than the cost that we are spending here. So it's applicable for a complex project, not for smaller projects. Smaller projects can totally ignore this. So let's have a quick look at the outputs. We have only one output. The project documents get updated. What gets updated here? Majorly the risk report. That is the document that gets updated. Why risk report? That's because after this process is complete, there will be updates in the risk priority, right? We have some analysis done. So what are the new risks? As I mentioned in the previous example, the bigger bubble. After we do the analysis, we implement something, and then the bigger bubble becomes a smaller bubble. So the priority of the risk changes. So that is why the risk report gets updated after this process. All right, let's see what inputs we need. Again, the standard ones, the project management plan, we need it as input, project documents, all the standard documents that you can use as inputs, you can use. And the default enterprise environmental practice and organizational process assets are also covered. Okay, moving for the tools and techniques, we have expert judgment. Who can be the expert on this quantitative risk analysis? Because this itself is a huge task. It's a time consuming task. The data can be interpreted wrong if some wrong data collection happened. So we need that expert who already has experience in it. So similarly, all the data gathering techniques can be used nicely. The interpersonal and team skills, the soft skills can be used while you're gathering the data to perform this risk analysis. So representation of uncertainty. This is again a new term. We can spend some seconds here. So every input that we gather for this analysis, there is an amount of uncertainty associated with it. I think we all agree there. So a few probability distributions, like normal distributions, logarithmic distributions, all these logarithmic strategic or statistical distributions are given to reduce that uncertainty. So instead of just choosing the worst case scenarios, or if you use all the statistical graphs, all those parabolas, the bell curves. So if you use all this, the uncertainty becomes lesser. So the data is more and more accurate with the use of these uncertainty representations. And multiple data analysis tools can be used. Typically, as I told before at the introduction stage, a simple math on an Excel sheet or using a pen or a pencil on a blank paper, it is not going to work when you are going to do this. There are some sophisticated simulation tools available. Some simulation softwares can be purchased to do the quantitative risk analysis. Again, they come with additional cost. The licenses they are not free. So what happens here is you have to populate the inputs to this software. The probability, the detectability, the kind of risk or the type of the risk that we are dealing with, all these inputs that we give, and the quantity based on the experience from the previous projects, or it could be from the other industry-wide risks. They are given as inputs, and then we get an output curve. The S curves, kind of an S curve. We get something like this, and we have to interpret the values based on these outputs from the simulation software. Moving on, planning of the risk responses. Until now, we have identified the tasks, quantified them, qualified them. Now, in this process, we can identify the solutions that could address the risks. So we are identifying the responses. Let's have a quick look at the outputs that we need. The project document get updated after we identify the responses or the solutions to it. We can move to the inputs, the project management plan, the documents. All these Default inputs are considered here. Let's move to the tools. Let's see if we have something that we have not learned. Okay, we have so many things that we have not learned. We have learned expert judgment. We are consulting somebody who is good at giving solutions. We have data gathering tools, multiple data gathering tools, which can come handy. Of course, the interpersonal team skills also are important. Okay, here comes the new term, strategies for threats. What is this? The PMBOK guide talks about different strategies for threats and opportunities. You can see we have similar topic here to discuss. So for both threats and opportunities, and also I think we have strategies for overall project. So these three things, they have identified that we have 5 different kinds of strategies. What happens here is, firstly, we escalate. When we see risk, or when we see a threat that is the negative risk, what we can do is the stakeholders can either escalate it, he can either avoid it, he can either transfer it to somebody else, he can mitigate it. Mitigate is nothing but give a quick solution to it, or you can just accept the threat and live with it. These are the 5 strategies when a stakeholder comes across a threat. So similarly for the opportunities, what happens is, instead of avoid, we are talking about opportunities here. So instead of avoid, this avoid becomes exploit. So we still have escalate. The higher management must know that there is an opportunity. And then instead of avoiding this risk or the threat, we are going to exploit that opportunity. So we are going to see by going how much distance we can actually make good use of this. Similarly, instead of transfer, because this is not a threat, we can share the opportunities with other colleagues. So there is an opportunity here. This relates to your department. Please focus on this so that we have a better opportunity for the project, better result. So instead of mitigate here, again, when we talk about opportunities, we can enhance the opportunity. We have a smaller opportunity, how we can enhance this to turn it to a bigger opportunity. And finally, accept stays the same. So for this 4, 5, and 7, these are the 5 strategies that we should work on. We have also a new term here, contingent response strategies. What happens here is that this is in unavoidable events like a risk turning into an issue, there'll be a need for contingency plan. So just in case our original plan don't work, we have a plan B. So that is this contingency response. I think we touched upon the 7th. So moving on to data analysis, we can make use of multiple data analysis tools and the decision making strategies that we discussed. Okay, moving on. Implementing of the risk responses. This is also done throughout the project. So let's quickly see the outputs for the sake of time. Only the outputs. We have change requests that are being updated. We have project documents like issues log, risk register, risk reports. All of this are being updated. If we talk about the inputs, all the default inputs we can consider. These are the lists. If we talk about the tools and techniques, expert consultancy, we have already discussed. The interpersonal team skills always come handy. The PMIS is also well covered, I think. So moving on to the next process, monitoring the risks. Okay, this is also done throughout the project. So similar to all other managing processes and monitoring, this is also something similar to all the managing processes. So monitoring processes, managing project processes, almost the same. So what happens here is, through this we will learn if the project assumptions, if they are still valid. We do some assumptions at the beginning of the project. So whether those assumptions of the risks are actually correct or not, whether the responses that we have given, the solutions that we have given, whether they are still valid or the implementation has actually been effective or not. We monitor such things here. Let's see the outputs. The work performance information of all the individual risks and the effectiveness is recorded. The change requests are updated. The project management plan, the components like assumptions log, lessons learned, all these things are updated. The organizational process assets, as I told, there is a risk breakdown structure that we discussed similar to WBS, work breakdown structure. So if that gets updated, that means the organizational process assets, the formats of that risk breakdown structure gets updated. So this is also updated here. Inputs, we can make use of project management plan, project documents, all the work performance data and reports that we discussed here, they can be made good use. Okay, any new tools here? No. I think we have also covered the data analysis tools, that anything that we have learned before is applicable here. The risk audits, what happens here is, just to monitor the performance, the project manager has authority to go and audit the risks are being implemented, at the ground level or not, right? So that is also very good tools and techniques. And finally, of course, the meetings always effective. Hi and hello everyone. Welcome back to the PMP exam preparation. We are going to cover these two knowledge areas: project procurement management and the project stakeholder management. Project procurement management. Why does any organization procure anything from the vendors or suppliers? All the organizations could just make everything, and then sell the products themselves, right? If you have to purchase something from the vendor, they'll add a little bit of profit, and then they'll give it at a higher price than the manufacturing cost. So why do organizations want to spend this extra money when they could just manufacture it all themselves? So the answer is simple. It is the capital expenditure. So not all products have same technology. It takes a very huge investment cost for manufacturing even the tiniest bit of the component. Let's say the hairpin or a water bottle. So even the cap of a water bottle needs a huge machinery to be installed. So the manufacturing methods are different. The expertise is different. The raw materials is different. Even for a small component with 2 or 3 subcomponents in it, they might have different processes for each and different materials for each of the components. So the processes are different, right? So the expertise needed to create that part is different. So the organization, if it starts developing all these expertise which somebody else already have, it takes years together to build a product. So that's practically not possible. So consider that you want to wear a suit, for example. Would you rather purchase it from a tailor who is the expert in the cutting top class two piece, or just do it yourself? We all prefer to go to the expert, or the worst case, we purchase it ready made instead of going to the tailor. No, but we never try to learn the stitching ourselves, as it costs a lot of money, time, energy, and mostly the skills, right? The skills here are the most important thing. So the organizations, they also follow the same methodology. They prefer purchasing from the experts. So the experts from that particular field who can develop and fit the product for the project's requirement, for the organization's requirement. But what happens is the organization shares its standards that the particular product has to be formed in their own methodology, in their own standard. They have to follow certain guidelines. The product has to adhere to some quality standards. All these things will be given to them, and the expert who is already aware of these manufacturing processes, who already has this capital expenditure with them, they come forward to sell that product to us. So to make things more legal and also to protect this product from leaking to the competitors, what happens is there will be contracts signed between the sellers and buyers. We discussed about these contracts or agreements, right? Memorandum of understanding, non-disclosure agreements, service level agreements, etc. All these agreements are there to ensure that when an organization gives business to a seller, the technology is not shared with somebody else. This vendor creates that product only for this buyer, not for anybody else. So when we talk about these agreements, right, NDA, SLA, or MOUs, these agreements, unfortunately, they cannot be signed by the project manager directly, right? So project manager, of course, helps in creating them. He is the one who also, adds value to these agreements, but he cannot directly approve it because project manager, it's a big responsibility. But considering the organization, he is not authorized to sign it, right? So who can sign it? Only the project sponsor, who is considered as a legal representation of this company. He is the one who can approve this agreements or countersign on these agreements. So and the procurement is it's not always done just for the physical product. We talk only about product manufacturing, different processes and all, but sometimes the services are also outsourced. Consider a testing facility. For example, you create a product, let's say a bicycle bearing, which is in the both wheels. So to test the life of this bearing, you'll be needing a huge equipment which runs for a number of days at a particular environment. So instead of just purchasing all this huge equipment that you need for testing, you can just go to the vendors who creates these bearings or who tests these bearings, and he'll give you the result. Okay, this bearing fits your load capacity, or this bearing fits or runs for your life. So based on the application area, the seller of the product he's called the contractor, or he's called a supplier, or he's called a vendor, or sometimes even a service provider, because we are taking services from them. So we, as a buyer or purchaser, can be the owner of the final product. We can use this product as it is without adding any modification to it, or we can also add some value to it, assemble it to something else, paint it, or add your own logo to it, and then sell it to another end user of this product. So it can be anything. So who should do this procurement activity? In small organizations, which has very smaller scale projects, this activity is usually done by the project manager himself. But in case of complex projects, a separate purchase team handles these procurement activities. Also, before we move on to the process details, let's also spend a bit about understanding the emerging trends in the procurement. We are understanding the trends in each and every process. So in this procurement process, the advancement in the use of software that has been trending right now. We are all aware of this SAP software, which allows us the creation of purchase orders, right? But in addition to this, all the memorandum of understanding, service level agreements, whatever agreements that I mentioned, they are also being driven by the softwares. So these agreements are pushed in this software, and then they are electronically countersigned by the opposite party. And these softwares are designed to bound to these legal agreements. And secondly, risk management. Earlier, all the defects related to product were they were directly being held responsible by the supplier. But now the risks which the purchasing organization can handle are being handled by the purchasing organization itself. They're not pushing these concerns towards the supplier. So only the problems that are in control of the supplier or the vendor are being handled by the vendors. And next emerging trend is the use of technology to monitor the vendors. I have not seen this, as famous, but this is also an emerging trend, that it will not be an exaggeration when I say this, that some vendors are even allowing the video monitoring of their processes to their customers. What they do is they install a small webcam in front of the huge machinery where the tests are being run at remote areas, and then the live feed of these testing facilities are being sent live to the customer who's sitting at a very remote end, maybe even a different country, right? So these are also the emerging trends in procurement management. Let's have a quick look at the processes in this knowledge area. We have three processes to learn. First thing is the planning of procurement management. Here we identify the sellers and identify the vendors. Basically, all the procurement decisions are made here, right? So let me quickly make use of the pen. Conducting the procurements. This deals with talking to suppliers, getting their quotations, etc. Controlling the procurements. This is nothing but monitoring and performing monitoring the performance of the whole procurement plan. So let's quickly jump to each one of these processes.